So, Renato, is this the last we're going to hear of Tucker Carlson?
It's complicated. I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And I'm Asha Rangappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent, and I'm a legal and national security analyst.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down to a soundbite or a tweet. So, Asha, I found this shocking, the news that Tucker Carlson was fired from Fox, right? Did you see that coming at all?
I saw a breaking news tweet in my feed, and I had to double check who it was because I was like, is this a reputable person? And it was like a reporter, but then I was like, okay, I need more confirmation. And then it was just, my Twitter feed exploded with it. So
yeah,
crazy.
Well, it's crazy, right? I mean, what's interesting about it, like, look, Don Lemon was fired the same day, but it was different, right? Because Don's ratings were lower. You could see that coming potentially because CNN is they're having ratings issues. With Fox, Tucker was like a big moneymaker for them. He was their number one show, number one in the ratings, and they care about that stuff. That's what cable news is all about. They sit there and look at those ratings on a regular basis. It had to take a lot for them to decide that losing that income stream and potentially paying Tucker Carlson out on the new contract extension he signed in 2021, like pay that full contract to not be on the air was worth it.
Yeah, this is coming on the heels a week later after Fox News agrees to pay $787.5 million to Dominion. So that's also a hit to their bottom line. And I think you had some thoughts about that, by the way. We should maybe do a little recap because there were mixed. Initially, I think the immediate mixed feelings about that settlement, that somehow Dominion had sold out, et cetera, et cetera. But I think you gave a reality check on both the interests of the company, which is not to vindicate the interests of democracy, but to, recover their reputational harm. And also that for them, this was an amazing settlement. And compared to going to trial was the right thing for them to do. Yeah,
this was the time I did a bunch of tweets that I knew no one was going to like, and they were not going to do very well. It's much easier to tweet out like democracy, Dominion wins, democracy loses, or something along those lines. I think, the reality is this was a lawsuit for money. Dominion is suing Fox for like a whole lot of money. And so they're not like suing for democracy or they're suing to like change the world. They're suing. It's a civil lawsuit for money. So ultimately, at the end of the day, it's all about money. And, they're suing for $1.6 billion, which candidly, I think was a stretch number. That was like their highest possible
and that's
ask.
Like they just pull that out of thin air. I mean, in other words, that's their valuation of what their harm is. It's not like some objective calculation. Like, in other words, there was no guarantee that if they had gone to trial and they won, that they would somehow get that verdict.
Absolutely. So great point, Mash. I mean, this is a company that's kind of failed. Okay. Got bought out. It's really not worth that much right now. Like if you wanted to buy Dominion, it's a lot cheaper. I mean, their main value right now is the settlement. Okay. Other than that, they don't really have much going on for them. So this is all like an imaginary, like what could have happened if, Donald Trump didn't exist or was a rational person sort of thing. And in that hypothetical world, they think they're worth that kind of money, but there's no guarantee a jury would have agreed or that it wouldn't have gotten reduced on appeal. And even if they won a trial and a jury gave them, let's say, the 1.6 and some punitives, so it was like an amazing result, that not only could have been reduced on appeal, but there would be years of appeal to get the money. In other words, they wouldn't get the money today. They'd get the money years from now after Fox litigated for a long time fighting them to get the money. A dollar in 5 years is worth less than $1 today. And so for all sorts of reasons, this was an amazing result by these attorneys to achieve this for Dominion. And I think there was a real disconnect between the expectations that people had on Twitter and elsewhere in the public versus, the realities of what this lawsuit was. If I had gotten this result for my client, I'd be like popping champagne.
Yeah. And to your point about the years of litigation, that's what's going on in the Alex Jones lawsuit, right? I mean,
Right.
there was a huge settlement, I think larger than this, that was handed down in that. But, he's an individual. It's not clear that whether he's going to pay up because I suppose he could declare bankruptcy and all of that. Whereas Fox News has deep pockets, and there's no question that they can pay this out immediately. And as you mentioned, it gives them the payout right now.
Right. Just so everyone understands, often when you get a verdict in a trial, let's say the jury awards you $100 million, you often settle after that for something less than $100 million, even after you won the trial, because you want to resolve the appeals, get your money right away. You don't have to go through what's a collections action. There are literally lawyers who go, and it's a big area of law where you go and you try to collect money from judgments against entities that either don't have the money or make it hard to get the money or want to litigate it out. So it's a challenge that I'm sure the folks who own Dominion didn't want to go through.
Yeah. So where does this leave? So Dominion is done. They've moved on. Lawyers are very happy. They're popping their champagne. So Fox, meanwhile, back at the ranch, they've got other lawsuits, right? Smartmatic, I think, maybe bringing a defamation, or have they already filed a defamation lawsuit?
Yeah, they have, and that's a lot of exposure as well. It's interesting, right? They fired Tucker before any of that other litigation was resolved.
Yeah, and I remember seeing reporting of a shareholder derivative lawsuit as well, and I suspect that there may be more of those. In other words, this is not the end of their legal woes. My colleague Jeff Sonnefeld at the School of Management actually, with his colleague Steve Tian, wrote a great explainer, which I posted on my Substack last week, which I thought was good because it laid out, what the fallout is in terms of all the corporate, consequences that are going to come out of this. So people shouldn't be too quick, I think, to say that that this was, a lose for overall. I do think, though, that, the fact, and I want to turn to Tucker in a second, but I just want to say, I think the fact that we are people have put so much of their hopes on somehow this lawsuit vindicating the interest of democracy kind of tells you where we are, that we're relying on the courts and these corporate actors to kind of vindicate these interests that they're really not designed to do. That's not what this type of lawsuit is designed to do. And I think it really gets to where we are right now in terms of the fragility of our democracy and the breakdown of social trust, that we're kind of relying on, some sort of corporate defamation lawsuit to restore our democracy or something.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Ash. I mean, I think you're right. Part of it is just a hopelessness. People feel like there's no way to achieve change other than that. But I do think it's definitely a misreading of the power of the justice system, right, in the courts to achieve change. But I do think there's been a real impact here. And you said your colleagues did that paper. I mean, it's obvious to me. This is a very significant loss for Fox. And there's going to be reverberations, I think, for a period of time. I don't think this is the last one, but I will say I didn't have this on my bingo card as the first significant reverberation, right? Tucker Carlson getting fired. I didn't see that coming.
Yeah. So what the link here is that it's not that Tucker is costing them money, because as we know, he actually makes them a lot of money. It sounds like from reporting that he's fired because of what was revealed about his private exchanges.
Right.
And it sounds like maybe it was his disparaging the executives at the company, his I don't know. You mentioned that he had used a lot of, vulgar and derogatory language about other individuals. But it feels like it's got to be something really bad that we may not completely know right now, because it was sudden, right? Like, he left on Friday, signing off his show saying, "We'll see you on Monday." My understanding is that Rupert Murdoch and Suzanne Scott made the decision on Friday, and that he basically got like 10 minutes notice before they actually publicly announced it. Like, in other words, they called him, and then 10 minutes later they announced it, which is cold. That's cold, I have to say.
Yeah, it was. That was cold. I was absolutely cold-blooded. And I think, and by the way, Fox News stock went down, or Fox stock went down very significantly. Actually, they lost more money when they fired Tucker versus the Dominion settlement, because that was baked into the price. In other words, by that point, people assumed that they were going to lose some amount of money. It was just a matter of how much. I think that, one thing that I had seen, NPR had reported that, he used the C word, basically referring to women who had appeared on the show. And that there is a lawsuit by a former producer who was actually a star witness, I think, for Dominion, right? She was somebody who was kind of like a truth teller, former Fox producer who had been on Tucker's show and on Jeanine Pirro's show. Fox has had a very significant problem with sexual harassment and its treatment of women who work there for some time. They've had very successful shows. There's a great movie made about one of them.
Bombshell? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. It was the one where they had, it was Gretchen Carlson and
Megyn Kelly.
Yeah, Megyn Kelly and so on.
I think it's Bombshell on Amazon.
Yeah, it was an interesting movie. But, it's worth remembering that Tucker Carlson's predecessor in that hour, Bill O'Reilly, was also the most popular name in cable news. And he lost that position because of his own sexual harassment lawsuits. So it was a certain point where Fox decided this was enough, after settlements that he paid out. So it's a significant issue. And I think that they're probably worried because, unlike a company where maybe there haven't been issues in the past, if you kind of continue to have issues over time, I think a jury, some of that prior history might be able to come in to that trial, and it might impact the damages. So I think that certainly played a part as well.
Well, I think that gets to, is this really over? I mean, there's a question of what Tucker's going to do now, but also Fox News is just going to fill this slot with somebody else. I mean, the Bill O'Reilly precedent suggests that, I suspect the person who's going to fill that slot is not going to be all that different, because they've tapped into a really ugly and dark shadow of a portion of America that really likes this, right? Obviously, there is an audience for it, and there's high demand for it. And so this is like a hydra. I mean, you cut off one head and another one grows back. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
I do. I love the analogy. It's actually when you cut off one head, multiple heads grow back,
grows back. And
it gets worse.
And, there's actually another great movie, a documentary called Divide and Conquer, The True Story of Roger Ailes, which really gets into the genesis of Fox News, how it was created, the philosophy behind it. And it is created not just as a conservative news outlet, but specifically to tap into fear and to really kind of galvanize people to, frankly, to create this us and them, idea. I mean, he modeled the photo angling and the ways that they do their news shows on Nazi propaganda. Like the cinematography of Nazi propaganda films. And specific to this was they learned that sex sells, right? Like, so Roger Ailes was the first one to do the glass table so that you could see with I think like a higher camera angle, so you could see the women's legs under the table. And, and they're always wearing short skirts. I remember when I first started doing TV, I did a few hits on Fox, and went to their studio, I think in DC, and they have a very specific makeup way. Like it's like lots of gloss. I mean, it was just I could tell from the way they did my makeup that it was different than the other ways that the other
That's
studios.
interesting.
Yes. Very, glam. They're appealing to a certain, I mean, they're definitely trying to go for a particular look. And so if this is a part of their model, it's hard to see how anyone who replaces Tucker is really going to be able to depart meaningfully from that approach.
Yeah, they're going to plug in Jesse Waters or somebody who's like a total lunatic of his own, right? Somebody who's irresponsible and say lunatic, but it's just somebody who I think knows better, but is just irresponsible and wants to get ahead and is willing to say anything to do so. So I put Tucker in that category. He was sort of like one of those, limousine Republicans. I don't know, one of those Northeastern type Republicans.
Yeah, an heir to the Swanson fortune who went to Dartmouth, but who railed against the elites.
Right. Yeah. And he was, I used to watch him back when he was on CNN and MSNBC. He was just like a very moderate milquetoast kind of guy. Okay. He's like Bill Kristol or something. And nothing against Bill Kristol, but he's not a flamethrower. Neither was Tucker Carlson, but they changed. So I think that's what'll happen there. I think one of the interesting things, Asha, is what's going to happen with Tucker Carlson. Mm-hmm. And I think, one thing that is, I think, clear to me is that he has to act quickly while he still has the attention of his audience. In other words, like a Bill O'Reilly, right? Who even thinks about that guy anymore? He was the number one name in cable news for a period of time. He had this big show, and he's just off doing a podcast or whatever he does. Occasionally makes some appearances on News Nation. So I think, Tucker Carlson has an opportunity potentially to he could cut a deal with Newsmax in exchange for an equity stake, own part of Newsmax and anchor Newsmax. Him and Megyn Kelly could come in and, have shows on Newsmax and try to get them in cable lineups, or, some Daily Wire TV, or some way in which he kind of re-merges, and potentially it's a counterweight to Fox, which I think would be worse, because then Fox would essentially be a race to the bottom.
Yeah.
Where Fox would be bad. The way they got into trouble with the Dominion, so in the Dominion era, is even though they recognized the potential liability,
is because they had to keep their audience share.
Yeah, they were worse. They were beaten by Newsmax in a certain hour, and they freaked out, and they were like, "We cannot lose our audience." And if they're constantly competed out by the Tucker-owned alternative, that could be a problem for them.
Or Tucker could run for president.
Yeah. Oh, and I don't know what will be worse, that or Trump.
Because then
right?
Fox would be forced to cover it.
It'd be funny, right? Because he suddenly is persona non grata on Fox. They barely covered his departure, and some of their audience are upset, right? I'm sure you've seen a lot of the same comments I have, where people on the right are attacking Fox and so forth. We'll see.
I would not, sir. I mean, I have been saying this for a couple of years. That I think he's going to run for president, because the Republican base, at least, has gone off the rails. I mean, I don't think experience matters, obviously. And he's really the only person who has the same level of celebrity clout that Trump does. And I don't think he'll be able to eclipse Trump. He could very well end up as his running mate. And, he has all the right positions for that demographic. He's now got the martyrdom from Fox News. And I think yesterday, I saw some quote from Trump where he was still praising Tucker Carlson. So the fact that Tucker Carlson had been slamming Trump, in his private messages, he was saying how much he hated Trump and couldn't wait for him to be gone. I don't think Trump cares, because he delivered on air and he gave him favorable coverage. And so, I'm just saying that's a possibility, and I would not discount it.
Yeah, I wouldn't discount it either. I mean, I think if Carlson seems like a very savvy guy. I mean, people joke he got fired by all three networks, right, at this point, by CNN, MSNBC, and Fox. But, he's pretty savvy to have lasted as long as he is and been this successful. And so I think he's going to recognize he's got to do something quickly, and it's going to be something dramatic. Either, like I said, either he's going to create, essentially take ownership of another network and become a mouthpiece, or like you said, he could try to force his way into Trump's ticket or try to run. Yeah, nothing would surprise me at this point. So, Asha, we have talked about a lot of legal issues, a lot of legal cases, and it really says something that we have a case going to trial this week against Trump involving allegations that he raped a well-known woman. I would say somebody who was, not just somebody who was obscure, actually a very well-known, prominent woman. And that it didn't even make it on our podcast until today. It's really something.
So that case is going into jury selection today. So let's just give a little brief background on how we got to this point. So E. Jean Carroll wrote a memoir in 2019, and in it she detailed an event where she claimed that Trump raped her in the dressing room of Bergdorf Goodman. When that came out and Trump was questioned about it, he said, and this is when he was president, he said that it was all false because she was not his type. So she filed a defamation lawsuit against Trump, saying, basically, he was calling her a liar. I assume that was sort of the crux of it. In that case, the Department of Justice said that they would be the ones who would be defending Trump in that defamation lawsuit because he made the statement while as president. And I think we can go into the policy reasons for that, because they have not changed that position since Trump left office. And that, I think, is in litigation, right?
Yeah, and specifically, I should just put a finer point on it. It's that he made those comments in the course of his official duties, which I think threw a lot of people for a loop, right?
Yes, because I think he said it at a press conference. And so that lawsuit, I think, is still pending, but in litigation. It hasn't gone to trial. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, E. Jean Carroll filed another lawsuit in November of last year under a New York statute. I think it's called the New York Survivors Act, which allows victims of sexual assault to bring civil claims that are otherwise outside of the statute of limitations. I assume otherwise outside the criminal statute of limitations is what I'm understanding.
Right.
So she filed that lawsuit. Obviously, the event that is the basis of that lawsuit predates Trump's being president. So the Department of Justice has nothing to do with that. And that case has progressed pretty quickly and is now about to go to trial. And so this is for damages for that he raped her and emotional distress and all of the, physical and emotional and mental damages that came from what she's alleging against Trump.
Yeah, which is significant. I had handled a sexual assault case in New York. It's very challenging, but the damages are quite significant, right? It's a violent crime. I thought that the defamation case was consolidated with this case and that it was a joint trial. But I could be wrong about that.
According to NPR, that.
Oh, okay. I'll trust NPR.
But
I trust NPR.
We can fact check that.
Unlike Elon Musk, I trust NPR. I think they're great.
Okay.
So, all right. So we've got this trial starting, and there's been a lot of hubbub about this trial. A lot of motions and back and forth. Like I said, the only reason that I think we haven't been focused on it is because Trump got indicted and a lot of other things have occurred recently. But this is, I think, a very significant case. I think one thing I would just say is it's interesting that it is not resolved itself. this is another case. I said about the Dominion
You mean with
case.
a settlement?
Yeah, that's right. That's what I mean, a settlement. I had said about the Dominion case, I would have settled it if I was Fox's lawyers. I think Fox, based on the public reporting, was getting very bad advice from its general counsel regarding that case. But I think here, it's just another one where Trump, his own stubbornness may hurt him, because this is a case where usually, even if you win, you lose. It's going to be brutal, because there's going to be a lot of very embarrassing and difficult details that are going to come out about Donald Trump in this lawsuit,
including testimony from other women who claim that he assaulted them.
Yes, which is usually not admissible. You can't typically say, for example, this person, tried to shoot me, and I'm going to show all these other times where he attempted to murder other people and bring that in. It's actually what's called prior bad act. You're trying to show the propensity of somebody to do something. You have to have the evidence stand and fall in that case. But in this, there's a particular exception to that in this type of case.
And how does that exception work? So to quickly say, I think the big takeaway from evidence with Dan Kahan, I don't know if you took evidence with Professor Kahan.
I did not, but I took evidence with another Yale law professor.
Is that people? Because people, I'm saying this because people might be saying, well, obviously, wouldn't the jury want to know if somebody had tried to shoot 1 million people before, or had done this before? But you're always weighing the probative value of the evidence against the prejudicial effect that it could have. So you're kind of balancing these two interests. And I think with the prior bad acts, the reason that it is generally excluded is because the prejudicial value, the idea that that a jury could be swayed because of past conduct as opposed to deciding the conduct that's in front of them, would outweigh what that evidence could actually show.
Right. So it typically if Asha is stating the rule exactly right. So you generally, there's limited ability to show prior bad acts, and it's something under Rule 404, 404B under the Federal Rules of Evidence, for example, in federal court, and you have to you basically show the you have to show that you're using it for another purpose. I'm not trying to show that this person raped people in the past. They're trying to show that they, there's an MO. They'd always leave us a playing card afterwards. There's signature, something. There's some, or that it shows their intent in some way. You have to try to find the way around that. In this type of, but there have been a relaxation, and I don't know. I will say I'm not an expert in New York Rules of Evidence. But and this is in federal. And I will say this is in federal court. But there are changes, and it's in which there's a relaxing of these rules in the context of sexual assault. So that it is a big deal that the jury is going to be able to hear about a pattern of behavior, in the same way that, I'll draw an analogy, there was 2 trials of Bill Cosby, if you recall. In the first trial, it was a hung jury. And it was partly because the judge ruled, and the judge was trying to weigh the probative nature of that testimony versus its prejudicial value, and decided to exclude most of the women who had been victimized, who were going to testify, who wanted to testify against Cosby. And in the subsequent trial, the judge allowed many more of them to testify, and it was a very different result. And I think here, the fact that Judge Kaplan is allowing some additional testimony is very, very important.
And just to link this to a broader context, this type of issue came up in the Chauvin case too, right? Because he had all these prior disciplinary instances, and only some of them could come in. So that would have been under it's a similar prior bad act issue.
That's right. It comes up in many criminal cases. So I will just say I've tried a lot of criminal cases. And often it would be very frustrating when you're on the prosecutor side of it, which I was for a long time, because the person had been, for example, had a long string of drug convictions, but yet their defense is like, I just happened to be at the Burger King where the drug deal went down. Like, I just was getting a burger. And it's like, come on, like, you have like 14 prior felony drug convictions. Of course you weren't, just didn't happen to be on the scene of a drug deal, but all that gets excluded. And so you're trying to, show logic to the jury of why he's there. And like, it's, if they heard about the prior convictions, it would be a trivial to get a conviction in that case. So it comes up a lot in criminal cases, but it's become more of a thing in these type of in cases of this type.
So is it more relaxed because it's a civil case?
Yes, that is true, and I but I will say that there is a if in under New York state law, if you have a pattern of behavior in sexual cases, they can come in, and this was in the Harvey Weinstein case. It was very important under New York law. So I'm not an expert in New York law. I'm not a member of the New York bar, but states there's a patchwork of different rules that states have adopted to try to, and some of them are statutory, some of them are judge created. Where they've tried to relax it in these type of cases because there's an understanding that it can be challenging in a he said, she said situation where you've been sexually assaulted to prove your case. And so, here I think this will be very significant, just like it was for Cosby, Weinstein, other important cases. I'm not necessarily comparing Trump to those cases. I'm not going to prejudge the evidence or whatever, but the same type of legal issues come up.
Yeah. And just to be clear, this is not the only evidence that E. Jean Carroll plans to present. I think there's also going to be testimony from people who worked at Bergdorf Goodman at the time, some friends that she told not soon after, or not too long after. And the testimony the testimony of the prior allegation, the prior victim, Trump recently, there was just a ruling, I think, where Trump tried to get that excluded well after I think the judge had already ruled on it. Like it was a late appeal of some kind. And I think the second time he was trying to get this excluded and he got shot down.
Yeah, definitely some very shoddy lawyering. This is Tacopina and Lena Haba. He doesn't have even his A team, okay, on this. I mean, it's he's got a better lawyer, for example, in the Manhattan DA case. But some very big mistakes. I mean, another mistake that they made was, E. Jean Carroll's attorneys, who are very fine attorneys, Roberta Kaplan and so on, who they had wanted to get Trump's DNA to try to see if there was trace amounts of it on her person and on an outfit that she claims that she wore that day. And that's the sort of thing the defense probably should have just went with, and because it seemed like a shot in the dark to me. Like she's not saying that, like she's not like Monica Lewinsky saying, here's the stain and I know this was the DNA of the person I had.
She's just saying, let's see if there's something there.
Yeah, this is just like, let's just give it a try. And like, it's also not a dispute that he had interacted with her. It's not like the mere fact that he had interacted with her would prove that he had raped her. And so that, I just thought it was a bizarre, but so after fighting it and opposing it and actually winning on the issue, suddenly the Trump team, a light bulb went off. And they're like, oh, this is actually going to look bad if he ever wanted to take the stand, or, they'll make light of the fact potentially that we don't know because, Trump could have provided this and he didn't, that sort of argument. And so then they're like, okay, now we want to provide DNA. And they did that, like, once again, late in the game. And the judge is like, no,
that ship has sailed. Yeah. And I read that Tacopina says that Trump is going to testify. What?
I mean, ordinarily you would say yes. I mean, ordinarily he would testify. You would ordinarily put the client on in this situation because it's the client's word versus her word. And if the client doesn't testify, the jury is going to presume there's a good reason why. So you ordinarily would put the client on. Obviously, with Trump, super problematic. It didn't sound
because he's been deposed. I mean, once he gets up there, if he starts departing from what he said before, he'll look like an idiot.
Yes, that's the problem. That's an issue with depositions. And it didn't sound like it went particularly well for him based on public reporting about that deposition. I think another issue, I mean, there was this whole fight about whether he'd have to appear at the trial. He doesn't have to appear at the trial, but Tacopina's like, well, he's not really planning to appear, but he might appear. But we want the jury to be instructed that, like, hey, he's saving everyone a lot of effort and the Secret Service a lot of effort by not being here to basically essentially undercut the fact, like, Trump doesn't want to sit there for weeks and be subjected to hearing.
But he doesn't want any adverse inference to be drawn from the fact that he's not there.
Right. And it's interesting. I mean, the judge could have gone either way on that. That's one of those judgment calls I think a judge could make, where a judge could say, oh, I'm not going to say any of this stuff with the Secret Service that you want me to say, but I'll say that you shouldn't infer anything. But the judge refused to do that. He could be here or not be here. It's up to him, but we could protect him here in the federal courthouse. And so that was another interesting and bizarre call. I will tell you, if I was, defending that case, of course you'd want your client there, sitting there the entire time, reacting to everything, showing the jury he cared and he took this seriously. I think if he doesn't show up, it suggests to the jury he's not taking it seriously, and that's a very significant problem. One other thing, by the way, that came up, Asha, to get to an evidentiary point, is E. Jean Carroll's team, I think, wisely pointed out that it looked like the Trump team had designated portions of his testimony in which he was essentially attacking her own history, sexual history, as a way of trying to tarnish her character. And there are actually very specific rules in the federal rules of evidence to prevent that from happening in these kind of cases. Very important victory, because, of course, that had been a tactic that had been used for a long time, where if a woman was victimized, she essentially get re-victimized by having her entire life put on. She'd be stand in judgment, right, from being on the stand.
Yeah, and as from what I understand, the judge also admonished Trump's lawyers to tread very carefully and to not try to sneak that kind of stuff in.
Exactly. And I think that's something just for the folks at home. It's a very important trial tactic where you kind of put a marker. I call it putting a marker down. And you're like, look, I'm drawing a line here, and I'm saying this better not happen. I'm putting everyone on notice. Like, I see what's going on here, and I'm not going to let it happen anymore. It's a very big. It's a big boy move, how you want to. It's like a sort of power move that you make in a trial. And that's exactly, I think, her legal team made the right move there. So, Asha, we've been all over the place talking about things recently. What have you been up to? What's going on with you?
Well, I got back from a trip to Virginia last week where it was 80 degrees and beautiful. And I have to say, whenever I go into southeastern Virginia, it's like my happy place, because mainly, I mean, the weather is just so nice and it's pretty. And I was mainly in the Williamsburg area. Nice. Doing the college visit. So William and Mary. I went to Charlottesville. But we also I decided to give my son a little bit of Virginia history. So we stopped at Monticello and we went to Mount Vernon. These, by the way, I feel like everybody, has their own, depending on where they grew up, their, stock field trips, right? And I was really fortunate because where I grew up, like our stock field trips were Jamestown and Williamsburg and Monticello and Mount Vernon. So we would go to those just all the time growing up. And what was really interesting is that both of those sites now have really integrated the history of slavery, and I think really done a good job of telling the story of enslaved people and, how they fit into the complicated past of those individuals. So it was really interesting. By the way, in case Jim Jordan's listening, the Thomas Jefferson Foundation makes a note that they receive no state or federal funds. So,
I love it. So he can't, bring in the descendants of Sally Hemings to try to grill them.
Exactly. What about you? And by the way, I was sad to come back because it is really cold. It is almost May, and I'm wearing a cashmere turtleneck, and the other day in my office because Yale has already turned the heat off. I don't know why they do this every April, even though they know that it's not going to get warm until probably like mid to late May. I was like literally wearing my jacket and gloves in my office.
Wow. Yeah. It actually makes me feel good because I'm in Chicago and it's freezing here. And I assume just because I made the fateful choice to live in the Chicago area as opposed to somewhere else. So I'm glad everyone's cold. It makes you feel better when everyone's suffering, not just you. I'm sure the people in like Southern California and Arizona aren't, but for the rest of the country, we're cold. I've been good. I actually was in New York last week and saw a lot of people that some of our listeners will know. I actually had dinner with Ari Melber and Andrew Weissman and Dan Alonso and many others, Joyce Vance and others. When I was out there, I'll be in DC this week for a conference. So I've been doing a lot of traveling. I went to a girls lacrosse game with my stepdaughter played in yesterday. So that was interesting experience to see. It's a pretty violent game, even though they don't supposedly have physical contact. It's very brutal game, but actually was very fun to watch. So I've been doing well, and so is Henry. Henry is the star, and I think the kind of de facto mascot of the girls lacrosse team. He's
that's awesome.
Yes.
And I'm trying to say, I think if you can see, Pancake is asleep on the chair behind me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Henry would be in the background, but he's very busy. So he's he's got work to do. He's got a lot going on.
MSW Media.